I stared at the closed mahogany door, the lingering scent of cedar and winter frost from my bonded alpha fading into the night as he rushed to the side of his first love, leaving me to face the agonizing fever of my heat cycle entirely alone. If you want to see how this heartbreaking journey of betrayal and rebirth unfolds, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means everything. Part 1. The sprawling estate of the Sterling family was an architectural masterpiece of glass, steel, and dark marble. It was a fortress built by one of the city's most ruthless and powerful alpha CEOs, Kalen Sterling. To the outside world, it was a symbol of untouchable wealth and perfect domestic bliss. To me, it was a beautifully gilded cage. I am Julian, an Omega who was foolish enough to believe that time and devotion could rewrite the past. I was wrong. The past is a ghost, and in this house, that ghost had a name, Elias. Papa, is Daddy coming to read me a story tonight? I looked down at the small, pajama-clad boy tugging at the hem of my sweater. Leo was 4 years old, a tiny miracle with Kalen's piercing silver eyes and my soft, chaotic dark hair. The innocent hope radiating from his small face felt like a physical blow to my chest. I forced a gentle smile, crouching down to his eye level and smoothing a stray curl from his forehead. My fingers trembled slightly, a subtle tremor that warned of the biological storm gathering inside my body. Daddy is caught up with some very important work at the office, my sweet pup, I murmured, my voice thick with a lie I had recited 100 times before. But I can read you the story about the dragon and the moon. How does that sound? Leo's shoulders slumped, the bright silver of his eyes dulling with a familiar, quiet disappointment. He promised, Leo whispered, clutching his stuffed wolf tightly against his chest. He promised he would be here for my bedtime. I know, baby. I know. I pulled him into my arms, burying my face in his soft neck. He smelled of baby lotion and the faintest hint of sweet milk, a pure, untainted scent that usually soothed my Omega instincts. Tonight, however, the ache in my chest was too profound. I carried him to his massive, star-themed bedroom, tucked him under the heavy down comforter, and read to him until his breathing evened out into the soft rhythm of sleep. When I finally stepped out of his room and closed the door softly behind me, the suffocating silence of the mansion crashed over me. I leaned against the cold corridor wall, closing my eyes as a sudden, sharp cramp seized my lower abdomen. My breath hitched. It was starting. The suppressants I had been taking were losing their efficacy, and my natural heat cycle was breaking through. For a bonded Omega, going through a heat without their alpha wasn't just painful, it was biologically devastating. It felt like your very veins were filled with crushed glass, your soul screaming for a tether that simply wasn't there. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I dialed Kalen's private number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then the cold, automated voice of his voicemail filled my ear. I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over my lashes. Kalen, I whispered into the receiver, my voice raw and desperate. Please, it's starting. The suppressants aren't working anymore. I need you. Leo asked for you, but please just come home. I ended the call and dragged myself toward our master bedroom, a massive, immaculate space that felt more like a museum exhibit than a shared sanctuary. Kalen's side of the bed was perfectly made, untouched and cold. He hadn't slept in this room for 3 weeks. Not since Elias returned to the city. Elias was a delicate, ethereal Omega, Kalen's first love, and the only person who had ever managed to melt the ice around the formidable Alpha's heart. They were supposed to be inevitably bound, but a tragic misunderstanding and interference from the Sterling patriarch had driven them apart. Kalen had married me out of duty, a strategic alliance arranged by our families to secure corporate dominance. I knew he didn't love me on our wedding day. I knew his heart belonged to a ghost. But over the 5 years of our marriage, through the birth of our son, through quiet dinners and shared silences, I had foolishly convinced myself that the ghost had faded. Kalen had marked me. We were bonded. I thought that meant something. But the moment Elias stepped off a plane 3 weeks ago, single and supposedly in distress, Kalen's carefully constructed world shattered, and I was caught in the falling debris. Suddenly, there were emergency board meetings that lasted until 3 a.m. There were unexplained weekend business trips. And there was the scent. No matter how much Kalen showered before returning home, my Omega senses could detect it beneath the sharp cedar of his natural pheromones, the sickeningly sweet scent of white lilies. Elias's scent. A violent shudder ripped through my body, dropping me to my knees on the thick bedroom rug. The fever was spiking faster than I anticipated. The bond mark on the juncture of my neck burned like a branding iron, a physical manifestation of my alpha's rejection. The bond was a living thing, and right now, it was starving, screaming at me that Kalen's attention, his protective instincts, his very soul, were directed elsewhere. I dragged myself toward the ensuite bathroom, my vision blurring at the edges. I needed water. I needed cold. I reached the marble counter and gripped the edges, staring at my reflection in the massive mirror. I looked like a ghost. My skin was flushed with an unnatural feverish red, my dark eyes dilated and glassy with pain, my lips bitten and bruised from suppressing my own cries. I looked pathetic. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with Kalen's name. A pathetic, desperate whine escaped my throat, a pure instinctual sound, and I snatched the device, answering it with trembling fingers. Kalen! I gasped out, my voice breaking. Kalen, please, where are you? There was a pause on the other end of the line. The background noise wasn't the quiet hum of a corporate office or the silence of his private car. It was the soft, rhythmic beeping of a medical monitor. Julian. Kalen's voice was low, rough, and entirely devoid of the warmth I so desperately craved. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a subordinate. I received your voicemail. Then you know I need you, I sobbed, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heat, Kalen. It's here. I'm burning. I can't do this alone. The doctor said going through a bonded heat unanchored could cause permanent damage to my nervous system. You need to come home. Another agonizing pause. I could hear the steady intake of his breath. And then, a sound that shattered my entire universe. A soft, frail voice in the background murmured, Kalen? Who is it? Does your head hurt? Come back to bed. It was Elias. The air was sucked out of my lungs. The world stopped spinning. The agonizing burn of my heat momentarily vanished, replaced by an absolute, freezing numbness that started in my chest and radiated out to my fingertips. Kalen, I whispered, the word tasting like ash on my tongue. Where are you? Elias had a panic attack, Kalen stated smoothly, though I could detect the tight, defensive edge in his alpha tone. He collapsed. I'm at the hospital with him. He's fragile right now, Julian. He has no one else in this city. He's entirely dependent on me at this moment. He has no one. A bitter, broken laugh ripped from my throat. I am your husband. We are bonded. I am the father of your son. Your son, Kalen, who cried himself to sleep tonight because you broke another promise to him. I am going into a dangerous heat cycle, and you are sitting by the bedside of your ex-lover because he had a panic attack. Don't be dramatic, Julian, Kalen snapped, his patience fraying. You have a full staff at the mansion. Call Dr. Harrison. He can administer a stronger dose of medical suppressants and in 4-drip to keep you stable. I am dealing with a real crisis here. Elias is completely unanchored. I am unanchored. I screamed, the sound tearing my throat, my Omega instincts finally rebelling against the absolute disrespect and abandonment of my alpha. You marked me. You claimed me. You don't get to abandon me for him. Keep your voice down, Kalen growled, a low, warning alpha command that vibrated through the phone and forced my knees to buckle against my will. My biology forced submission, even as my mind raged. I will not discuss this with you while you are hysterical. Have the doctor come over. I will be home when Elias is stable. Do not call this number again tonight. The line went dead. The dial tone echoed in the silent bathroom, a mocking soundtrack to the death of my marriage. I slowly lowered the phone, staring blankly at the dark screen. He chose him. Again. After 5 years, after a child, after a soul-binding mark, he chose Elias's momentary anxiety over my physical agony and our son's broken heart. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering loudly against the marble tiles. I curled in on myself on the cold floor, the fever of my heat returning with a violent vengeance, crashing over me in dark, suffocating waves. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the absolute devastation in my chest. Every memory of the last 5 years flashed before my eyes. The awkward but gentle way he held Leo for the first time. The rare, small smiles he gave me over morning coffee. The nights we lay side by side, his heavy arm draped over my waist, making me feel invincible. All of it was a lie. I was merely a placeholder, keeping his bed warm and managing his estate until the true owner of his heart returned to claim his throne. As I lay there shivering on the bathroom floor, the pain ripping through my abdomen and the bond mark pulsing with toxic, rejected energy, something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break. It was a quiet, profound realization. The Julian who endlessly waited by the window, who made excuses for his alpha's absence, who accepted the scraps of affection tossed his way, that Julian died right there on the cold marble. I forced my eyes open. Through the haze of fever and unshed tears, my vision cleared with a new, terrifying clarity. I reached out a trembling hand and gripped the edge of the heavy bathtub, dragging my weak, burning body upward. My legs shook violently, threatening to give out, but an alien strength was rising within me. The strength of a mother cornered. The strength of an Omega who realizes that survival depends entirely on walking away. I looked in the mirror one last time. The pathetic, weeping creature was gone. Behind the flushed skin and dilated pupils was a cold, hard resolve. Kalen Sterling thought he could keep me caged in this mansion forever, a convenient husband for the cameras and a dutiful mother for his heir, while he played savior to his first love. He had underestimated me. He had forgotten that before I was a Sterling, I was my own person. I stumbled out of the bathroom and into my walk-in closet. My hands were clumsy, my breathing ragged as the heat cycle demanded a mate. I was fiercely denying it. I bypassed the designer suits and silk nightwear Kalen had bought me. I grabbed a large, sturdy duffel bag from the top shelf. I threw in comfortable clothes, Leo's essential documents, my passport, and the emergency funds I had quietly stashed away over the years, a paranoid habit that was now my salvation. Every movement was agony. My body felt heavy, drenched in cold sweat, the pheromones of a distressed Omega filling the room, thick and sweet and desperate. But I didn't stop. I dragged the bag down the long, silent hallway. I didn't look at the expensive art on the walls or the antique vases. This was never my home. I pushed open the door to Leo's room. He was still sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling. I approached his bed, my heart fracturing into a million pieces at the thought of taking him away from his home, from the father he idolized despite the neglect. But leaving him here, in an environment where he would learn that he was second best, where he would learn to accept the same emotional scraps I had accepted, that would be a far greater sin. "Leo," I whispered, gently shaking his small shoulder. "Leo, wake up, my sweet pup." He stirred, rubbing his silver eyes with tiny fists. "Papa, is it morning?" "No, baby," I said softly, forcing a reassuring smile through the pain tearing my body apart. "We're going on an adventure. Just you and me. We need to go right now." I didn't pack his toys. I didn't pack his expensive clothes. I just wrapped him in his favorite blanket, grabbed the stuffed wolf he refused to sleep without, and lifted him into my arms. He was heavy, and my weakened body screamed in protest, but I held him tight against my chest. His pure scent grounded me, fighting back the worst of the heat fever. We slipped down the grand staircase like ghosts. The mansion was completely silent. The security staff were stationed outside the perimeter, unaware of the internal exodus. I bypassed the main garage. Kalen tracked all the family cars. Instead, I moved toward the servants' entrance, my arm wrapped tightly around my sleepy son. As I stepped out into the freezing night air, the wind cutting through my thin sweater, I didn't look back at the towering Sterling estate. Kalen had made his choice. He chose the ghost of his past. He chose his first love. And tonight, I chose myself. I chose my son. Kalen Sterling was about to learn what it truly meant to be unanchored, because by the time the sun rose, his husband and his heir would be nothing more than a memory, vanished from his life without a trace. End of Part 1. Part 2. The freezing night air was a violent shock to my feverish system, biting through the thin fabric of my sweater like invisible daggers. Every frantic step I took away from the Sterling estate sent a fresh wave of agony radiating from my lower abdomen. My breath plumed in the cold darkness in ragged, desperate gasps. The heat cycle was a biological mandate, a primitive force designed to strip an Omega of logic and replace it with a singular, consuming need for their bonded alpha. My body was screaming for Kalen, punishing me for creating distance between us. The bond mark on my neck throbbed with a toxic, rhythmic burn, a cruel reminder that I belonged to a man who was currently holding someone else. I clutched Leo tighter against my chest. He was surprisingly heavy, his small limbs hanging limply in the deep sleep of an exhausted 4-year-old. The weight of him, the sweet, pure scent of his soft hair, was the only thing anchoring my fracturing mind to reality. If I were alone, I might have succumbed to the feral instincts tearing at my sanity. I might have crawled back to that gilded cage, begging for the scraps of Kalen's attention. But I wasn't alone. I was a mother, and an Omega protecting their pup could override even the most brutal dictates of biology. I kept to the shadows of the towering hedges that lined the exclusive neighborhood, my eyes darting frantically at every passing pair of headlights. Kalen's security detail was meticulous, but they were trained to keep threats out, not to prevent the master's decorative husband from walking out the servant's entrance in the dead of night. By the time I reached the main avenue, my legs were trembling so violently I thought my knees would shatter against the concrete. The fever was escalating, turning my blood to liquid fire. I needed to get out of the city limits. Kalen owned the police, the politicians, and half the transportation infrastructure in this district. If he realized we were gone before I crossed the state line, he would lock down the city, and I would be dragged back, humiliated, and likely stripped of my custodial rights for being an unstable Omega in heat. I spotted an old, battered taxi idling outside a 24-hour diner. It was a stark contrast to the sleek, armored SUVs I was accustomed to, but right now it looked like a chariot. I practically fell into the back seat, shielding Leo's sleeping face from the harsh yellow glow of the street lamp. "Where to?" the driver grunted, a heavy-set beta who barely glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "The old Central train station," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "The one in the lower district. Please, as fast as you can. I have cash." I shoved a thick wad of bills through the partition. The driver's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the money, but he didn't ask questions. He threw the car into gear, and we sped off into the labyrinth of the city. As the neon lights blurred past the dirty window, the adrenaline that had fueled my escape began to wane, leaving me entirely at the mercy of my biology. I curled into a tight ball around Leo, burying my nose in his favorite stuffed wolf. The pain was excruciating. It felt as though the very marrow in my bones was boiling. I bit down hard on my own wrist to muffle a distressed whine that bubbled up from my throat. My pheromones were spiking, flooding the cramped space of the taxi with the heavy, overwhelmingly sweet scent of a terrified, unanchored Omega in distress. The driver rolled down his window, coughing slightly. "You okay back there, mister? You smell like... Well, you don't smell too good. You need a hospital." "No." I panicked, my voice cracking. Hospitals meant records. Records meant Kalen. "No hospital. Just the station. Please." I closed my eyes, trying to build a mental fortress against the agony. Unbidden, my mind drifted back to the hospital room where Kalen was currently sitting. Was he holding Elias's hand? Was he whispering those low, soothing alpha praises that he used to reserve for me during my pregnancies? "You're safe, I've got you, my beautiful Omega." The thought was a physical blade twisting in my gut. For 5 years, I had tolerated his emotional distance, rationalizing that he was simply a stoic, emotionally unavailable man. I had convinced myself that his coldness was a flaw in his nature, not a reflection of his feelings for me. But seeing Elias return had shattered that illusion. Kalen wasn't incapable of warmth, devotion, or frantic concern. He simply hadn't deemed me worthy of those emotions. I was a transaction, a convenient vessel for the sterling heir. And the moment his true mate, the one his soul actually recognized, even if biology had bound him to me, was in distress, I ceased to exist. Tears finally breached my defenses, hot and silent, tracking down my fever-flushed cheeks. I wept for the years I had wasted trying to be perfect, trying to be quiet, accommodating, undemanding. I wept for the boy I used to be, who had sacrificed everything for an arranged marriage because he foolishly believed in duty and the sanctity of the bond. "We're here," the driver announced, jolting me from my spiral. I thanked him, leaving the rest of the cash on the seat, and stumbled out into the freezing dampness of the lower district. The central station was a decaying monolith of iron and dirty glass, a hub for the desperate, the poor, and those trying to disappear. It was exactly what I needed. I bought 2 tickets for the farthest destination the night train would take us, a grim, industrial border city known as Oakhaven, a place notorious for its shadowy underworld and lawless territories. I paid in cash, using a false name I had practiced in my head 1,000 times. The train was nearly empty, smelling of stale smoke and damp wool. I found a compartment in the very back, locking the heavy sliding door and pulling the faded curtains shut. I laid Leo down on the worn velvet seat, covering him with his blanket. He shifted, his little nose scrunching up, but the rhythmic clacking of the train against the tracks quickly lulled him back to sleep. I collapsed onto the opposite seat, the fight finally draining out of me. The train lurched forward, pulling us away from the only life my son had ever known, and the only man I had ever loved. The rhythmic clacking of the wheels against the iron tracks became the soundtrack to the most agonizing night of my life. As the train sped further into the pitch-black countryside, the last lingering effects of my medical suppressants evaporated completely. What followed was a biological inferno. Without an alpha's scent to soothe the raging hormones, an omega's heat turns inward, attacking the nervous system. I curled into a tight, trembling ball on the dusty velvet seat, burying my face into my own knees. My skin was on fire, yet I shivered so violently my teeth chattered. The bond mark on my neck felt like it was being carved open with a rusted blade. I shoved my own fist into my mouth, biting down hard on my knuckles until I tasted the sharp, metallic tang of blood. I couldn't scream. I couldn't sob out loud. If I made too much noise, I would wake Leo, or worse, attract the attention of the train conductor. So, I suffered in silence, choking on my own tears in the suffocating darkness of the compartment. Hours bled into one another. Sometimes I hallucinated. I thought I heard Kalen's heavy footsteps outside the door. I thought I smelled his sharp cedar scent, only to realize it was just the bitter smoke from the engine car. Every time I surfaced from the delirium, my eyes locked onto Leo's sleeping form. For him, I chanted in my mind, a desperate mantra to keep my heart beating. I am doing this for him. When the first gray light of dawn finally crept through the gaps in the curtains, the worst of the fever had broken, leaving me a hollow, exhausted shell. My clothes were soaked in sweat, my muscles ached with a deep, bruised fatigue, but my mind was startlingly clear. The intercom crackled to life, a scratchy voice announcing our arrival in Oakhaven. I forced myself to stand, swaying dangerously as the train ground to a halt. I splashed some lukewarm water from my bottle onto my face, trying to scrub away the scent of distress. I needed to look functional. Oakhaven was not a city that was kind to the weak. It was a territory run by ruthless syndicates, alphas who operated far outside the polite, corporate cruelty of Kalen Sterling. Here, survival meant staying invisible. "Leo," I whispered, gently rousing my son. "Wake up, sweet pup. We're here." Leo blinked heavily, sitting up and looking around the dingy compartment with wide, confused eyes. "Where are we, Papa? Are we at the adventure place?" "Yes." I forced a smile, helping him into his little coat. "This is a new city. It's going to be a bit different from home, but we're going to be safe here. Just you and me." We stepped off the train and into the biting chill of the Oakhaven morning. The station was chaotic, filled with thick fog and the heavy, metallic smell of industry. It was a stark, brutal contrast to the pristine lawns and quiet streets we had left behind. I gripped Leo's hand tightly, pulling my scarf up to cover my face and the bruised bond mark on my neck. My priority was finding a cheap motel, somewhere off the grid where Kalen's private investigators wouldn't think to look. We walked for blocks, navigating through narrow, garbage-strewn alleys and avoiding the gaze of loitering groups of rough-looking betas and alphas. My body was running on pure adrenaline and maternal instinct, but my knees were dangerously close to giving out again. The aftermath of an unanchored heat was a severe physical crash. I stumbled over an uneven patch of cobblestone, my grip on Leo's hand faltering for just a fraction of a second. I fell hard onto the cold, damp street, scraping my palms. "Papa!" Leo cried out, his small voice echoing in the gloomy alleyway. "I'm okay, baby, I'm okay," I gasped, trying to push myself up. But my arms trembled, refusing to support my weight. My vision swam with dark spots. Suddenly, the heavy, oppressive silence of the alley was shattered by the sound of deliberate, echoing footsteps. Someone was approaching from the shadows. A scent hit me before the figure even stepped into the dim light. It wasn't the refined cedar of Kalen Sterling. It was an overwhelming, dominant aura of dark tobacco, old leather, and something incredibly dangerous, like the calm air right before a violent thunderstorm. It was the scent of a true, apex alpha. I scrambled to pull Leo behind me, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked up, my eyes meeting a pair of cold, calculating obsidian eyes. The man standing before us was tall, broad-shouldered, draped in a perfectly tailored dark overcoat that did nothing to hide the lethal grace of his stance. He looked down at me, taking in my flushed face, my trembling form, and the terrified child hiding behind my back. His gaze lingered on the raw, rejected bond mark on my neck. I expected disgust. I expected the usual predatory aggression of an alpha spotting a vulnerable omega in a lawless territory. Instead, a subtle, dangerous shift occurred in his dark eyes. "You shouldn't be out in this district looking like that, little omega." His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that sent a strange shiver down my spine. "Especially not with a pup. The wolves around here aren't known for their manners." I bared my teeth in a defensive snarl, ignoring the physical weakness threatening to drag me under. "We don't need your help. Stay back." The corner of his mouth twitched in a shadow of a smirk. He didn't move away. Instead, he took one slow step closer, the sheer force of his presence overwhelming the narrow alley. "I don't offer help," the alpha murmured, his gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that made the air suddenly difficult to breathe. "But I do recognize something precious that's been thrown away." And in Oakhaven, I collect discarded things. End of Part 2. Part 3. I collect discarded things, the stranger murmured, his deep, resonant baritone vibrating through the damp alleyway. It wasn't a threat, nor was it a comfort. It was a simple, terrifying statement of fact. My body was trembling so violently that my teeth rattled against each other. The aftermath of an unanchored heat cycle was a brutal, unforgiving descent. My nervous system felt completely fried, every nerve ending screaming in exhaustion. Yet, as this massive, imposing alpha stepped closer, maternal instinct, the most primal force in the universe, surged through my veins, temporarily overriding the biological collapse. I pushed myself up onto my scraped knees, thrusting one arm out to keep Leo safely tucked behind me. I bared my teeth, a low, warning hiss escaping my throat. It was a pathetic display from a broken Omega, but I didn't care. We are not discarded things. We are not things at all. Stay away from my son. The Alpha paused. The dim, flickering light of a distant street lamp finally caught his features. He was breathtakingly dangerous. Sharp, aristocratic cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed by dark stubble, and eyes so black they seemed to absorb the meager light of the alley. He didn't wear the polished, sanitized suits that Kalen favored. This man wore a heavy, dark wool overcoat draped over broad shoulders, over a simple black turtleneck. He moved with the silent, lethal grace of a predator that had never known a cage. He didn't look at me with the usual condescension of an alpha viewing a weakened omega. He looked at me with intense, calculating fascination. His gaze briefly flicked to the raw, angry bond mark on my neck, the crescent scar that was practically pulsing with rejected energy. "Fierce," he said softly, almost to himself. "You have the scent of a desperate, unanchored omega, a fever that should have killed you, and yet you dragged yourself and your pup to the worst district in Oakhaven just to escape. Whoever put that mark on your neck was a fool." "Don't talk about my mark," I spat, my vision swimming with dark, fuzzy spots. The adrenaline was fading rapidly. The ground beneath me felt like it was tilting. "Just let us pass. I have money. We don't want any trouble." "Little Omega," the man sighed, reaching into his coat pocket. I flinched, expecting a weapon, but he only pulled out a heavy silver lighter and a cigarette. He lit it, the brief flare of the flame illuminating a faint, jagged scar crossing his left eyebrow. "You are in the narrows of Oakhaven. Trouble doesn't ask what you want. In about 10 minutes, the local scavengers are going to smell that distress pheromone you're leaking. They won't be as polite as I am." "I can take care of us," I whispered, but my voice lacked any conviction. Even Leo seemed to sense my fading strength, his small hands gripping the back of my sweater tightly. "Papa," he whimpered softly. "You can't even stand," the Alpha pointed out, his tone devoid of mockery, simply stating a clinical fact. He took a slow drag from his cigarette, the scent of dark tobacco mixing with the petrichor of the alley and his own heavy, intoxicating pheromones. It was a scent of absolute authority and danger, yet, strangely, it didn't trigger my flight response. It commanded the space. "My name is Silas. Silas Vane, and whether you like it or not, you are coming with me. Because if I leave you here, your pup will be an orphan by sunrise." Before I could formulate a refusal, before I could even draw a breath to scream, the last thread of my endurance snapped. The dark spots in my vision rapidly expanded, swallowing the alley, the towering Alpha, and the terrifying reality of my situation. The last thing I felt was the freezing cobblestones rushing up to meet me, and then a pair of strong, incredibly warm arms catching me before I hit the ground. A heavy coat was wrapped around my shivering shoulders, blocking out the cold. "I've got you," a deep voice rumbled against my ear. And then, there was only darkness. When I finally opened my eyes, I expected the harsh fluorescent lights of a hospital or the grim, dirty ceiling of an Oakhaven motel. Instead, my senses were met with an overwhelming, unexpected warmth. I was lying in the center of a massive, impossibly soft bed. The sheets were high-thread count Egyptian cotton in a deep, rich emerald green. The room around me was cavernous but inherently masculine, decorated in dark mahogany, heavy velvet drapes that blocked out the sun, and walls lined with towering bookshelves. It smelled faintly of old paper, burning firewood, and that same, lingering scent of dark tobacco and leather. Silas Vane's scent. Panic, cold and sharp, immediately pierced through the fog in my brain. "Leo!" I gasped, shooting up from the pillows. The sudden movement sent a wave of dizziness crashing through my skull, but the agonizing burn of my heat fever was gone. I looked down at my arm and saw a small bandage in the crook of my elbow. Someone had given me an. Someone had treated me. I was wearing an oversized, incredibly soft black t-shirt that definitely did not belong to me, and my own clothes were nowhere in sight. He is entirely fine. A calm voice spoke from the corner of the room. I whipped my head around. Sitting in a plush leather wingback chair, legs crossed casually, was Silas. In the light of a nearby reading lamp, he looked even more intimidating. He was holding a crystal glass of amber liquid, his dark eyes fixed on me with that same unreadable, intense calculation. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice raspy. I pulled the heavy duvet up to my chest, my Omega instincts flaring wildly in the presence of an unfamiliar, dominant alpha in what was clearly his personal territory. "He is in the kitchen," Silas replied evenly, taking a slow sip from his glass. "My head of security, a man named Grigori, who is approximately the size of a mountain, is currently making him chocolate chip pancakes. Your pup has eaten 3 of them and is currently explaining the plot of a cartoon involving a dragon to a room full of armed mercenaries. They are thoroughly entertained." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process the image of my tiny, sheltered son lecturing a syndicate of Oakhaven thugs about cartoons. Your men are armed." "I run Oakhaven, little Omega," Silas said, setting his glass down on a side table. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The casual grace of the movement didn't hide the coiled power beneath it. "You stumbled into the territory of the Obsidian Syndicate. I am the head of it. So yes, my men are armed. But in this house, no one will ever raise a hand or a voice to you or your child. You have my word as an alpha." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Kalen was a ruthless corporate titan, a man who destroyed lives with the stroke of a pen. But Silas Vane was the underworld. He was the kind of danger that didn't hide behind lawyers and PR teams. Yet, sitting here, I felt a strange absence of fear. The scent in the room was dominant, yes, but it wasn't aggressive. It was protective. It was an alpha scent that said, "This space is secure." "Why did you bring us here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know me. I'm married. I'm bonded." I instinctively reached up to touch the crescent scar on my neck. It still ached, a hollow, empty pain, but the violent burning had subsided. Silas's eyes darkened as his gaze tracked the movement of my hand. A brief, terrifying flash of genuine anger crossed his face, not directed at me, but at the mark itself. "I know exactly who you are, Julian Sterling," Silas said, the name sounding foreign on his lips. "It's hard not to recognize the husband of Kalen Sterling. Your face was plastered on the cover of High Society magazine 3 months ago. The perfect corporate Omega, they called you." I flinched, looking away. "That was a lie. All of it." "Clearly," Silas murmured, standing up from the chair. He walked slowly toward the bed, stopping a respectful distance away. "I brought you here because I despise Kalen Sterling. He is a parasite who wears a custom suit. He deals in underhanded corporate warfare, crushing the lower districts of this state while pretending to have clean hands. But more than that, Julian." He paused, his dark eyes boring into my soul. "I brought you here because I saw an Omega, abandoned in the middle of a biological crisis, choose the agony of an unanchored heat crash over surrendering his pup to a broken home. That kind of strength, it is rare. It is beautiful. And it does not belong in an alleyway." My breath hitched. For 5 years, I had been told I was too quiet, too soft, too emotional. Kalen had made me feel like an accessory, a fragile thing to be managed. This terrifying Mafia boss had looked at me at my absolute lowest, covered in dirt and fever sweat, and called me strong. "What do you want from me?" I asked, gripping the duvet tighter. "I have money. I can pay you for the medical treatment and the room. But I won't be a pawn in whatever war you have with Kalen. And I won't be your kept Omega." A slow, devastating smirk spread across Silas's face. It transformed his harsh features into something incredibly handsome. "Keep your money, Julian. And I don't keep pets. I build empires. If you want to stay here, if you want my protection from the storm that Kalen is undoubtedly going to rain down on this state to find his property, you will stay as a guest. Under my roof, you answer to no one. Not even me." "Why?" I demanded, unable to comprehend this level of protection without a catch. "Nothing is free." "Because," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, "watching Kalen Sterling realize he lost the most valuable thing he ever possessed, and knowing it is sitting safely behind my walls, is a payment I will thoroughly enjoy collecting." 300 miles away, the pristine, glass-walled Sterling mansion was a tomb of silence. Kalen Sterling pushed open the massive front doors, his sharp cedar scent thick with the sterile, chemical smell of the hospital he had just left. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, rolling his shoulders to release the tension of the long, exhausting night. Elias was fine. It had been a severe panic attack, triggered by old trauma, but after hours of holding his hand and speaking in soothing alpha tones, Elias had finally fallen asleep. Kalen had felt a surge of old, protective instinct toward his first love, a nostalgic warmth that had blinded him to the reality of what he was leaving behind. He expected Julian to be in the kitchen, quietly making tea. He expected the usual routine: Julian's silent, reproachful gaze, the soft, apologetic submission, and then the inevitable forgiveness. Julian was soft. Julian always forgave him. "Julian," Kalen called out, his deep voice echoing in the empty foyer. "Where are you? And where is Leo? The house is too quiet." There was no answer. Only the hum of the climate control system. A tiny, almost imperceptible prickle of unease crawled up the back of Kalen's neck. His alpha instincts, usually so suppressed by the logic of the corporate world, suddenly flared to life. The house didn't just smell empty. It smelled devoid of life. The soft, sweet scent of his Omega, a scent he took for granted every single day, was stale. Fading. Kalen took the stairs 2 at a time, throwing open the door to the master bedroom. It was immaculate. The bed was made, but the closet door was slightly ajar. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled the door open. A significant portion of Julian's clothes were gone. Not the designer suits Kalen had bought him for galas, but the soft, comfortable sweaters, the practical shoes. The heavy travel duffel was missing from the top shelf. "No," Kalen whispered, the words sounding hollow in his own ears. He turned and practically ran down the hall to Leo's room. He pushed the star-covered door open. The bed was empty. The comforter was thrown aside. And the stuffed wolf, the toy Leo never let out of his sight, was gone. A sudden, violent pain erupted at the base of Kalen's neck. He gasped, his hand flying to his own bond mark. For the first time in 5 years, the tether that connected his soul to his Omega was completely, terrifyingly silent. It wasn't just distant. It was blocked. Julian had actively shut him out, pulling his presence from their bond with a force born of absolute rejection. "Sir." Kalen spun around. His head of security, a stern beta named Marcus, stood in the doorway, holding a tablet. Marcus looked pale, a rare expression for the hardened veteran. "Where are they, Marcus?" Kalen demanded, his alpha voice booming, shaking the very glass in the windows. "Where is my husband? Where is my son?" "Sir, I reviewed the perimeter footage from last night," Marcus said, his voice tight. He handed the tablet to Kalen. The black and white security footage played on the screen. It showed the servant's entrance at 2:14 a.m. The heavy door opened, and Julian stepped out into the freezing night. He was wearing a thin sweater, his posture hunched, carrying the sleeping form of Leo wrapped in a blanket. The camera caught a brief glimpse of Julian's face as he looked toward the street. He looked exhausted. He looked feverish. He looked completely, utterly broken. And then he walked off screen, disappearing into the dark. "He left during his heat cycle," Marcus said quietly. "Sir, an unanchored Omega in the middle of a heat leaving the safety of their territory. It's a death sentence." Kalen stared at the frozen frame of Julian's face. The phone call from the night before echoed in his mind. "My heat, Kalen. It's here. I'm burning. I can't do this alone. You don't get to abandon me for him." He had called Julian dramatic. He had told him to keep his voice down. He had hung up on his bonded mate while he was holding the hand of another man. The realization didn't hit Kalen like a gentle wave. It crashed into him like a derailed freight train. The heavy, suffocating weight of his colossal mistake crushed the air from his lungs. He had been so obsessed with the ghost of his past, with the fragile memory of Elias, that he had completely ignored the living, breathing, devoted family right in front of him. He had taken Julian's quiet strength for granted, assuming the Omega would simply endure his neglect forever. He had pushed his mate to the absolute breaking point. Suddenly, the faint scent of white lilies, Elias's scent, lingering on Kalen's own jacket from the hospital, hit his nose. A wave of intense, violent nausea rolled through Kalen's stomach. What had seemed fragile and necessary hours ago now felt like a toxic poison that had infected his life and driven away the only people who truly mattered. Kalen dropped the tablet. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the cracking of the glass mirroring the sudden, catastrophic fracturing of his entire world. "Lock down the city," Kalen growled, his eyes turning a dangerous, feral shade of alpha gold. The corporate CEO was gone. In his place was a frantic, terrified alpha who had just lost his pack. "Contact the police commissioner, the transit authority, every private investigator on our payroll. I want every train station, bus depot, and airport searched. Check the hospitals. Check the morgues. His voice broke on the last word. Find them, Marcus. Tear this entire goddamn state apart if you have to, but find my family. Back in Oakhaven, oblivious to the storm brewing in the city he had left behind, Julian finally stepped out of the bedroom. He had showered, dressed in the clean, oversized clothes provided to him, and followed the sound of bright, innocent laughter down the grand staircase of Silas Vane's fortress. He found the kitchen, a massive industrial-grade space that was currently occupied by 3 heavily tattooed men in tactical gear, and 1 tiny, giggling 4-year-old. Leo was sitting on the granite counter, his face smeared with chocolate, wearing a sideways baseball cap that was far too large for his head. "Papa!" Leo cheered, pointing a sticky finger at the largest of the men, a giant with a scarred face and a gentle smile. "Grigori said I can be a sniper when I grow up." Julian froze, his heart skipping a beat, but before he could panic, a large, warm hand settled gently on his lower back. He gasped, turning to find Silas standing right behind him. The alpha moved far too quietly for a man of his size. "Grigori," Silas said, his voice laced with amusement. "We discussed this. No recruiting the guests into the syndicate before they are at least 6 years old." The giant man chuckled, wiping his hands on a towel. "Sorry, boss. The pup's got a good eye. Natural talent." Silas looked down at Julian, removing his hand from his back immediately, respecting his space. "He is safe here, Julian. They all know the rules. Your pup is under my absolute protection." Julian looked at his son, seeing a genuine, unburdened happiness in Leo's eyes that he hadn't seen in months. The shadow of Kalen's absence wasn't hanging over him here. Then, Julian looked up at Silas. The mob boss was terrifying, ruthless, and dangerous. But in his dark eyes, Julian saw a profound, undeniable respect. For the first time since he had said, "I do" 5 years ago, Julian felt like he could finally breathe. "Okay," Julian said softly, his voice steadying as he met the alpha's gaze. "We will stay, Silas. But I need a job. I need to work for you. I refuse to be useless." Silas Vane's lips curved into a slow, dangerous, utterly captivated smile. "Oh, little Omega, I have a feeling you are going to be the most useful thing to ever walk into my territory." End of Part 3. Part 4. The passage of time in Oakhaven was not measured by corporate quarters or the endless cycle of high society charity galas. It was measured in the slow, steady rhythm of healing. 2 months had passed since the freezing night I fled the Sterling estate. 2 months since I traded a gilded cage for a fortress of shadows. In that time, the sprawling, labyrinthine compound of the Obsidian Syndicate had become more of a home than the pristine mansion I had lived in for 5 years. I was sitting at the massive oak desk in Silas Vane's private study, surrounded by towering stacks of ledgers, shipping manifests, and financial reports. The air was thick with the comforting scent of old paper, burning cedarwood from the fireplace, and the ever-present, grounding aroma of dark tobacco and leather that belonged exclusively to Silas. "The laundering margins on the southern port fronts are bleeding out by at least 4%, I murmured, dragging a red pen across a complex spreadsheet. "Whoever whoever the Sterling Corporation installed as the new regional overseer is getting sloppy. If you reroute the Obsidian Shell companies through the independent textile mills in the lower district, you can effectively choke out his supply chain without firing a single shot." Silence stretched across the room. I froze, the pen hovering over the paper, suddenly hyper-aware of where I was and who I was speaking to. Old habits, beaten into me by years of Kalen's condescension, flared up. "Omega, do not speak on matters of business. Omega, your place is looking pretty at the dinner table." I slowly raised my eyes, my heart giving a nervous flutter. Silas was leaning against the heavy velvet drapes of the window, a crystal glass of bourbon in his hand. He wasn't wearing his heavy overcoat today, just a tailored black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing arms corded with muscle and intricate dark ink. He was staring at me, not with the cold, dismissive annoyance Kalen used to give me, but with a profound, burning intensity. "Julian," Silas said, his deep baritone vibrating in the quiet room. He set his glass down and walked slowly toward the desk. The sheer, terrifying grace of his movements always made my breath catch. "Do you realize that in 2 months, you have completely restructured my legitimate front operations? My accountants, men who have worked for the syndicate for decades, are terrified of your red pen." I swallowed hard, dropping the pen and folding my hands in my lap. I overstepped. "I'm sorry, Silas. I shouldn't be interfering with the syndicates." "Stop." Silas planted both his hands on the desk, leaning in close until I could feel the absolute heat radiating from his large frame. His dark eyes locked onto mine, fierce and demanding. Never apologize for your brilliance in this house, Julian. Never shrink yourself down to fit into a box someone else built for you. Kalen Sterling was a fool who possessed a diamond and treated it like glass. I am not him. My breath shuddered in my chest. The sincerity in his voice, the raw, unfiltered respect from an apex alpha, was a potent drug. I leaned back slightly, my Omega instincts purring under the heavy, protective blanket of his presence. I just wanted to be useful, to earn my keep. You earned your keep the moment you walked into that alley and bared your teeth at me to protect your pup, Silas murmured, his gaze dropping briefly to my neck. The bond mark, the crescent scar that used to pulse with the toxic poison of Kalen's rejection, was no longer angry and inflamed. It had faded into a dull, silvered scar. The agonizing biological withdrawal of an unanchored heat had nearly killed me, but Silas's constant, neutral alpha presence had acted as a shield. He never pushed his own pheromones on me, never tried to overwrite Kalen's mark with force. He simply existed as a safe harbor, allowing my fractured nervous system to naturally sever the psychic tether to the man who had abandoned me. Papa, Uncle C. The heavy mahogany doors flew open, and Leo came barreling into the study, clutching a wooden toy sword. He was chased closely by Grigori, the giant, scarred enforcer who looked absolutely terrified of accidentally stepping on the 4-year-old. Little wolf, Silas said, his entire demeanor softening instantly. The terrifying Mafia boss vanished, replaced by a man who effortlessly scooped my son up into the air, making Leo shriek with delighted laughter. Have you conquered the kitchen already? I defeated the oatmeal monster, Leo declared, waving his wooden sword. He had color in his cheeks now. The quiet, anxious boy who used to wait by the window for a father who never came was gone. In his place was a vibrant, loud, confident child who was adored by a house full of hardened criminals. I watched them, a profound ache blooming in my chest, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude. Leo hadn't asked about Kalen in weeks. Children are remarkably intuitive. They know where they are valued. Kalen had given Leo a last name and a trust fund. Silas Vane gave him his time. Grigori, Silas said, setting Leo down on the edge of the desk. The playful tone vanished, replaced by the chilling, authoritative edge of the Obsidian Syndicate's leader. Status report. Grigori straightened up, his playful demeanor instantly hardening into military precision. Perimeter is secure, boss. But the scouts at the border pulled something interesting. 3 plainclothes operatives sniffing around the old train yard. They were asking questions about a high-profile Omega and a pup, flashing a lot of corporate money. The temperature in the room plummeted. The blood drained from my face, my hands instinctively flying out to pull Leo off the desk and against my chest. My heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. Kalen. He had found the trail. They're his, I whispered, panic constricting my throat. The faint, phantom smell of sterile hospital corridors and white lilies suddenly assaulted my memory. Kalen's private investigators. If they know we took the train to Oakhaven. Breathe, Julian, Silas commanded softly, though his eyes were completely black, his jaw clenched tight with lethal intent. He looked at Grigori. Did they leave the border? We escorted them out, boss, Grigori grinned, a feral, terrifying expression. Politely. Told them Oakhaven doesn't take kindly to corporate suits. But they know something. They'll be back. Let them come, Silas rumbled. He turned to me, his large hands reaching out to gently cup my trembling shoulders. The physical contact was an anchor in the storm of my rising panic. Listen to me. Oakhaven is my city. I control the police, the docks, the shadows, and the streets. Kalen Sterling has money and influence in the light. But down here, in the dark, his money is useless. He cannot touch you. He cannot touch Leo. Do you understand me? I looked up into his dark eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation. There was none. Only the absolute, unwavering promise of a predator protecting his territory. He won't stop, Silas, I warned, my voice shaking. You don't know his pride. Losing his Omega, his heir, it's a stain on his perfect image. He will burn this city down to drag us back. Then I will build you a throne from the ashes, Silas vowed, his thumb gently brushing against the collar of my shirt, dangerously close to my faded bond mark. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. No one takes what is under my protection. No one. 300 miles away, the Sterling corporate empire was beginning to fracture. Kalen Sterling stood in his glass-walled penthouse office, staring out at the sprawling city skyline that he owned. But the view offered no satisfaction. His reflection in the glass was unrecognizable. The polished, untouchable CEO was gone. His tailored suit hung loosely on his frame. His tie was discarded and dark, bruised circles shadowed his usually piercing silver eyes. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night in 8 weeks. His alpha biology was tearing him apart from the inside out. The bond mark on his neck was a black, necrotic bruise. Julian had severed the connection from his end, an act of sheer, desperate willpower that Kalen hadn't thought the soft Omega was capable of. Without the tether to his mate, Kalen's instincts were running feral. He couldn't concentrate. He snapped at his board members. The food tasted like ash. The pristine mansion he returned to every night felt like a mausoleum. Kalen, a soft, hesitant voice broke the heavy silence of the office. Kalen didn't turn around. He closed his eyes, a spike of pure irritation flaring in his chest. The door opened, and the sickeningly sweet scent of white lilies filled the sterile air of the office. Elias walked in, looking ethereal and delicate in a cream-colored cashmere sweater. He carried a silver tray with a cup of chamomile tea. "You missed your lunch meeting again, Alpha. I brought you something soothing. You're overworking yourself." Elias placed a gentle hand on Kalen's arm. 2 months ago, that touch would have sent a wave of nostalgic warmth through Kalen's body. 2 months ago, he had sat by Elias's hospital bed, convinced that this delicate Omega was the missing piece of his soul. Now, the touch felt like acid. Kalen violently jerked his arm away, spinning around with a low, menacing snarl that made Elias gasp and stumble backward, dropping the silver tray. The china shattered against the hardwood floor, spilling hot tea everywhere. "Don't touch me," Kalen growled, his voice vibrating with a dark, uncontrolled alpha aggression that he had never, ever directed at Elias before. Elias's eyes filled with tears, his lower lip trembling. "Kalen, I'm just trying to help. You've been so distant. You're destroying yourself over a husband who clearly didn't love you enough to stay." The words were meant to be comforting, but they were the match that ignited the powder keg of Kalen's self-hatred. "Did not love me enough?" Kalen repeated, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. He stepped over the shattered porcelain, backing Elias against the heavy oak doors of the office. "He endured 5 years of my neglect. He gave me a son. He spent his nights waiting for a man who was too blind to see the devotion right in front of him. He left me in the middle of a heat crash, Elias. Do you know what kind of agony that is? He risked death rather than spend one more second being second best. I was your first love," Elias sobbed, crossing his arms defensively. "We were supposed to be together." "You are a ghost," Kalen spat, the absolute truth finally tearing through the illusions he had built for years. "You are an echo of a past that doesn't exist anymore. I abandoned my mate. I abandoned my pup. Because of an illusion. And now my house is empty, my bond is dead, and my son thinks his father is a monster." Elias slid down the door, crying into his hands. But Kalen felt no pity. The protective instincts he once harbored for Elias were completely eradicated, replaced by a consuming, desperate obsession to find what he had lost. He stepped away from the weeping Omega, disgusted with himself for ever choosing this fragility over Julian's quiet, enduring strength. The private elevator dinged, and the heavy doors slid open. Marcus, the head of Sterling Security, stepped out. He took one look at Elias crying on the floor and the feral, exhausted look on Kalen's face, but his professional expression didn't waver. "Sir," Marcus said, holding up a secure encrypted tablet. "Vance's team just reported back. We have a lead." Kalen crossed the room in a blur of motion, snatching the tablet from Marcus's hands. His heart slammed against his ribs. "Where?" The night they left, a taxi driver confirmed dropping an Omega and a pup matching their descriptions at the lower district train station. Marcus explained quickly. Vance tracked the cash payments. They bought tickets on the midnight freight passenger line. We finally got the destination. Kalen looked down at the screen. A grainy, enhanced photograph taken from a distant traffic camera showed a hunched figure in a sweater, clutching a sleeping child, disappearing into the fog of a railway platform. Oakhaven. Kalen read the destination aloud, the word tasting like rust. "Sir, Oakhaven is entirely off the grid," Marcus warned, his tone grave. "It's syndicate territory. The local police have zero jurisdiction. Our money doesn't work there. If Julian is in Oakhaven, he is either dead or he's been claimed by the local wolves." A violent, ear-splitting roar tore from Kalen's throat. He hurled the tablet across the room, shattering it against the reinforced glass window. The thought of another alpha looking at Julian, touching his mate, breathing in his scent, it was a biological torture that eclipsed any physical pain he had ever known. "He is mine," Kalen roared, his chest heaving, his silver eyes flashing with a violent, predatory madness. "I don't care if the devil himself runs Oakhaven. Assemble the private military contractors. Empty the discretionary accounts. We are not negotiating. We are taking them back. Sir, an armed incursion into syndicate territory will start a bloodbath. Then let it bleed." Kalen snarled, grabbing Marcus by the collar of his suit. "I will tear that lawless slum apart brick by brick until I find my husband. Prepare the convoys. We leave tonight." The storm was no longer brewing. It was violently approaching the borders of the syndicate. Later that evening, the atmosphere in Silas's mansion had shifted from quiet domesticity to cold, calculated preparation. Men in tactical gear were moving heavy crates of munitions through the lower halls. The perimeter security had been tripled. I stood by the window of the study, looking out at the heavy iron gates of the estate. Leo was asleep upstairs, guarded by Grigori and two other men. My stomach was tied in agonizing knots. Kalen was coming. The man who had ignored me for 5 years was now willing to start a war to drag his prized possession back to its cage. The door clicked shut behind me. Silas walked in. He had shed his dress shirt and was wearing a black tactical vest over a tight long-sleeve shirt, a heavy sidearm holstered at his thigh. The sight of him, heavily armed and radiating lethal alpha authority, should have terrified me. Instead, it sent a wave of profound safety washing over my frantic nerves. "They're mobilizing," Silas said smoothly, coming to stand beside me at the window. "My informants in the capital say Kalen has hired a small private army. They're making a direct push for the Oakhaven border." "I should leave," I whispered, tears burning the back of my eyes. I looked down at my hands. "I can take Leo and run further. Into the mountains. If I stay here, your men are going to die, Silas. I am not worth a war." A heavy, calloused hand gently gripped my chin, forcing me to look up. Silas's dark eyes were burning with an intensity that took my breath away. "Do not ever say that you are not worth it," Silas commanded softly, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "Julian, my life before you walked into that alley was built on violence and cold control. But seeing you, watching you thrive in my home, watching your pup laugh in my halls, it breathed life into a dead man. You are the heart of this syndicate now." I stared at him, my lips parted, the air catching in my throat. He wasn't talking about territory. He was talking about me. The realization was terrifying, but exhilarating. Kalen had owned my body and my name, but Silas Vane was slowly, methodically claiming my soul. Silas leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could smell the gunpowder on his clothes, mixed with his intoxicating, dark scent. My Omega biology, dormant and traumatized for months, suddenly sparked to life, leaning into his warmth. "Kalen Sterling is coming to reclaim a broken, submissive Omega who no longer exists," Silas whispered, his gaze dropping to my lips before locking onto my eyes again. "Tomorrow, he is going to meet the Julian who runs the Obsidian Syndicate's books. And he is going to meet the Alpha who will burn his corporate empire to the ground to keep you safe. Are you with me, Julian?" I took a deep, shuddering breath. I thought of the gilded cage. I thought of the hospital room Kalen had chosen over my agony. And then I looked at the ruthless, beautiful man standing before me, who was willing to bleed for me without asking for anything in return. "I'm with you," I whispered. Silas smiled, a terrifying, magnificent sight. "Then let the corporate king come. We'll show him how the wolves of Oakhaven bite." End of Part 4. Part 5. The air in the Obsidian Syndicate's compound was thick with an electric, suffocating tension. It was the calm before a violent storm, the quiet heavy with the scent of ozone, polished steel, and the dark, aggressive pheromones of dozens of alphas and betas preparing for war. I stood in the center of the massive master bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. For 5 years, my reflection had belonged to someone else. I had worn pastel cashmere and tailored silk, soft, pliant fabrics chosen by Kalen to present the image of a docile, harmless corporate husband. Tonight, however, the person looking back at me was a stranger to the Sterling Empire. I was dressed in dark, utilitarian cargo pants, a heavy black turtleneck, and a fitted tactical jacket that one of Silas's men had procured for me. My dark hair, usually styled into a neat, elegant sweep, was pushed back haphazardly. But the most striking difference was not the clothes. It was the eyes. The fearful, anxious Omega who used to flinch at his alpha's displeasure was dead. In his place stood a man who had survived the biological fire of an unanchored heat, who had crossed a frozen city with his child in his arms, and who now managed the sprawling finances of the most dangerous syndicate in Oakhaven. I reached up and lightly touched the side of my neck. The crescent scar of Kalen's bond mark was a faded, silvery white. It no longer burned. It no longer tethered me to a man who didn't value my soul. I let my hand drop, feeling a strange, profound sense of armor settling over my skin. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Grigori's massive, scarred face peeked into the room. Despite his terrifying appearance and the heavy assault rifle slung across his broad chest, his eyes were remarkably gentle when he looked at me. "Julian," the giant beta rumbled softly. "It's time. The boss wants you and the pup in the underground bunker. They've breached the outer city limits." My stomach tightened, a cold knot of dread pulling at my intestines, but I forced my posture to remain perfectly straight. "How many men did Kalen bring, Grigori?" Grigori hesitated, shifting his massive weight. "A lot. It's a private military contractor firm. Ex-Special Forces, heavy armored vehicles." Sterling emptied his corporate war chest for this. "But don't you worry your head. The boss has the entire Narrows locked down. It's a labyrinth out there, and our boys know every shadow. Sterling's shiny corporate soldiers are walking into a meat grinder." I nodded, stepping out of the bathroom and walking down the hall to the guest room where Leo was playing. He was sitting on the thick rug, completely oblivious to the impending violence, constructing a massive fortress out of wooden blocks. "Look, Papa," Leo cheered, holding up a small toy dragon. "The dragon is protecting the castle from the bad knights." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I swallowed them down instantly. I knelt beside him, wrapping my arms around his small, warm body and burying my face in his neck. He smelled like vanilla and childhood innocence, a scent I would burn the world down to protect. "It's a beautiful castle, my sweet pup," I whispered, kissing his forehead. "Grigori is going to take you to a special, secret room now. It's like a bunker for superheroes. You get to watch cartoons on the giant screen and eat all the snacks you want, okay? Papa will come get you when the game is over." Leo's silver eyes widened with excitement. "A superhero bunker? Can Grigori come too?" "I wouldn't miss it for the world, little wolf," Grigori chuckled, easily scooping the boy up with one arm. He looked at me over Leo's head, his expression sobering into absolute, deadly seriousness. "No one gets past the steel doors, Julian. I swear it on my life." "I know," I breathed, touching Grigori's arm in gratitude. "Keep him safe." As Grigori carried my son away toward the secure underground levels, I turned my attention toward the main floor. The heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots echoed through the mansion. I walked toward the grand staircase, my heart pounding a steady, relentless rhythm in my chest. I had promised Silas I would stay behind the fortified lines, but as I reached the landing that overlooked the massive foyer, I knew I couldn't hide in the dark. This was my past coming to drag me back. I needed to face it. Silas was standing in the center of the foyer, looking like a god of war. He was fully geared, his dark overcoat replaced by a tactical rig. His jaw was clenched, his dark eyes locked onto the massive security monitors lining the wall. The screens displayed the perimeter of the estate, illuminated by the harsh glare of floodlights. On the monitors, the reality of Kalen's obsession was terrifyingly clear. Convoy trucks painted in matte black had smashed through the outer barricades of the Narrows. Dozens of heavily armed mercenaries were advancing on the estate's main gates, engaging in fierce, tactical firefights with Silas's syndicate members, who were firing from the rooftops and fortified windows. The night air outside was continuously ripped apart by the deafening crack of automatic weapons and the blinding flashes of muzzle fire. "They are pushing too hard on the west flank," Silas barked into a radio strapped to his chest. "Fall back to the courtyard perimeter. Let them funnel through the main gates. We trap them in the bottleneck." He turned, sensing my presence on the landing before I even made a sound. His dark eyes softened infinitesimally, the lethal alpha aura pulling back just enough to let me breathe. "I told you to go to the bunker, Julian," Silas said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that echoed over the distant sound of gunfire. I slowly descended the stairs, my boots making no sound on the marble. "He didn't come for your territory, Silas. He came for his pride. If he doesn't see me, he will level this entire block and kill every man fighting for you out there. I won't let your people die for my ghost." Silas closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. He reached out, his large, calloused hands gripping my waist. His touch was a grounding force, a sudden anchor of dark tobacco and leather that steadied my trembling nerves. "Listen to me," Silas murmured, leaning down until his lips were inches from my ear. "You are not a ghost. You are the lifeblood of this house now. I would lose every brick of this estate and every drop of blood in my veins before I let Kalen Sterling drag you back to that glass coffin. Do you understand?" "I am not going back," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, my eyes locking onto his intense gaze. But I have to end this. Kalen is driven by his alpha biology right now. His bond has been severed, and he is feral. He won't stop until he confronts the source of his rejection. A massive explosion shook the foundation of the mansion, sending a shower of dust falling from the crystal chandelier above us. The heavy, reinforced oak doors of the main entrance groaned under a tremendous impact. Kalen's mercenaries had breached the courtyard. Silas's eyes darkened to absolute obsidian. He stepped in front of me, his hand resting casually but dangerously on the hilt of his sidearm. He pressed a button on his radio. "Hold your fire. Let their commander through the doors. Disarm his escort, but let him walk in." The gunfire outside abruptly ceased, replaced by the eerie, terrifying sound of heavy boots crunching over broken stone and shattered glass. The main doors were violently kicked open. The cold night air rushed into the warm foyer, bringing with it the sharp, acrid stench of gunpowder, blood, and a scent that made my stomach violently churn. It was the scent of sharp cedar, but it was ruined. It was no longer the clean, crisp aroma of a corporate titan. It was sour, heavy, and choked with the metallic tang of feral, uncontrolled alpha desperation. Kalen Sterling stepped into the light. I couldn't suppress the small gasp that escaped my lips. I barely recognized the man standing before me. The immaculate, untouchable billionaire was entirely gone. Kalen was wearing a dark tactical jacket over a torn dress shirt. His face was bruised and smeared with soot, his knuckles split and bleeding. But it was his eyes that terrified me. His usually composed silver eyes were dilated, bloodshot, and glowing with an unnatural, predatory gold. He looked like a starving wolf that had finally cornered its prey. Behind him, several of Silas's heavily armed men had their weapons trained directly on his head, but Kalen didn't even seem to notice them. His feral gaze swept the massive foyer, completely ignoring the terrifying presence of Silas Vane, until his eyes locked onto me, standing slightly behind the syndicate boss. A ragged, desperate sound tore from Kalen's throat, a sound halfway between a sob and a territorial roar. "Julian," Kalen breathed, taking a staggering step forward. "My Omega. I found you." He reached a hand out toward me, his fingers trembling violently. Silas didn't draw his weapon, but he shifted his stance, his broad shoulders completely blocking Kalen's path. The air in the room suddenly grew unimaginably heavy, the atmospheric pressure dropping as Silas unleashed his own alpha aura. It was a suffocating, terrifying wave of absolute dominance, designed to force any invading alpha to their knees. "That is far enough, Sterling," Silas rumbled, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. "You are trespassing in my home. You are tracking mud on my floors. And you are speaking to someone who no longer belongs to you." Kalen finally looked at Silas, his feral gold eyes narrowing in pure, visceral hatred. The clash of their pheromones was almost physically painful, Kalen's sour, desperate cedar violently colliding with Silas's dark, controlled tobacco. "You," Kalen snarled, his lips pulling back to bare his teeth in a grotesque display of primitive aggression. "You miserable underworld scum. You stole my husband. You stole my heir. I will peel the skin from your bones while you watch your empire burn." He didn't steal anything. I spoke up, my voice cutting through the heavy, toxic air like a blade of ice. I stepped out from behind Silas's protective bulk. I didn't hide. I stood tall, my shoulders squared, facing the man who had broken my heart 1,000 times over. Kalen's eyes snapped back to me, the anger briefly flickering into a desperate, agonizing plea. "Julian, please. I know you're terrified. I know this animal forced you here. But I came for you. I tore this city apart for you. Just come here. Come to your alpha." He tried to infuse his voice with the alpha command, the biological frequency designed to force an omega into submission, to make their knees buckle and their instincts yield. For 5 years, that tone had dictated my every move. It had silenced my arguments and forced me to accept his neglect. The command hit me, heavy and resonant in the quiet foyer. And absolutely nothing happened. I didn't flinch. I didn't bow my head. I didn't feel the sudden, overwhelming urge to submit. The tether was gone. My soul was silent to his call. Kalen saw the complete lack of reaction in my eyes, and the realization struck him like a physical blow to the chest. He staggered backward a fraction of an inch, his breathing turning ragged. "Julian," Kalen whispered, his voice cracking, the arrogant alpha facade suddenly shattering into a million pieces of raw agony. "Why? Why aren't you answering me? The bond. I can't feel you. For weeks, it's been dead. I thought it was distance. I thought." "The bond died on a bathroom floor, Kalen," I said coldly, my voice devoid of any warmth, any pity. "It died while I was burning in a heat fever, begging my husband to come home and anchor me. It died while I listened to you soothe your ex-lover's anxiety over the phone, telling me that my biological agony was just me being dramatic. I was wrong, Kalen shouted, tears suddenly spilling over his soot-stained cheeks. The corporate king was crying, begging on the floor of a Mafia mansion. Julian, I was so utterly blindly wrong. Elias means nothing. He is a ghost. You are my reality. You are my husband. You are the mother of my son. I lost my mind when you left. I haven't slept, I haven't eaten. I am dying from the inside out without you. Please, Julian. I am begging you on my knees. Come home. He actually dropped to his knees, ignoring the dirt and shattered glass, his hands clasped together in a pathetic display of a broken man. A year ago, seeing Kalen Sterling cry would have shattered my heart. I would have rushed to his side, throwing my arms around him, forgiving him instantly because that was my role. I was the soft, accommodating Omega. But looking at him now, I felt nothing but a hollow, profound emptiness. You didn't come here because you love me, Kalen, I said, my voice steady, though my hands were balled into tight fists at my sides. You came here because you are in pain. You came because your biology is punishing you for abandoning your mate, and you want the pain to stop. You came because your pride cannot handle the fact that the quiet, submissive ornament you kept in your mansion finally realized his worth and walked out the door. No, Kalen sobbed, shaking his head violently. I love you. I swear to God I love you. If you loved me, I replied, my tone merciless, you wouldn't have brought an army of mercenaries to a city where your son is sleeping. You brought a war to Leo's doorstep to stroke your own ego. Kalen froze. He looked up, his feral eyes suddenly locking onto my neck. Because I was no longer wearing the high-collared silk shirts he preferred. The skin of my neck was fully exposed. He stared at the faded, silver crescent scar. You severed it, Kalen whispered, the horror in his voice absolute. You killed our Mark. You rejected me. I survived you, I corrected him. The silence that followed was deafening. Kalen stared at the scar, his mind struggling to process the ultimate rejection. In Alpha/Omega biology, an Omega severing a bond was incredibly rare. It required enduring a level of physical and psychological trauma that usually resulted in death. The fact that I was standing here, healthy and defiant, meant I had walked through hell just to be rid of him. Suddenly, Kalen's despair violently mutated back into feral, territorial rage. He lunged upward from his knees, his muscles bunching as he prepared to cross the distance between us, driven purely by the deranged instinct to grab me, to sink his teeth back into my neck and force the bond open again by sheer, violent will. If you won't come willingly, Kalen roared, a terrifying, inhuman sound, I will take you by force. He didn't make it 2 steps. Silas moved with a speed that defied his massive size. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply stepped into Kalen's path, his large hand shooting out and wrapping around Kalen's throat like a vice of solid iron. The forward momentum of Kalen's charge was stopped instantly, his boots skidding on the marble floor. Silas lifted the billionaire CEO effortlessly, his feet dangling an inch off the ground. Kalen clawed desperately at Silas's wrist, choking and gasping for air, but the syndicate boss didn't even flinch. I let you speak, Sterling, because Julian needed closure, Silas said, his voice dropping to a demonic, terrifying octave. The dark tobacco pheromones flooded the room, heavy and suffocating, completely dominating the space. But you have exhausted my hospitality. You do not roar at him. You do not lunge at him. And you will never, ever put your hands on him again. He is mine, Kalen choked out, his eyes bulging, his legs kicking weakly. He is his own, Silas corrected, his grip tightening just enough to make Kalen's face turn a dangerous shade of red. But he is under the protection of the Obsidian Syndicate. And in Oakhaven, we kill scavengers who try to steal from our home. Silas violently threw Kalen backward. The CEO crashed hard into the heavy oak doors, sliding to the floor in a heap, coughing and gasping for air as he clutched his bruised throat. Silas's men immediately stepped forward, the mechanical clacking of a dozen assault rifles being cocked echoing in the foyer. Kalen looked up, panting, blood dripping from his chin. He looked from Silas's terrifying, unwavering dominance to me. He expected me to cry out, to beg Silas to spare his life. He expected the soft Julian to emerge. I looked down at the broken man who had been my husband. I felt no pity, only the cold, resolute strength of a survivor. Take your men, Kalen, I said quietly, the finality in my voice ringing like a funeral bell. Take your trucks and your money, and go back to your empty glass house. If you ever come near this city again, if you ever try to take Leo from me, I won't ask Silas to stop. Kalen stared at me, the feral gold in his eyes finally dimming, replaced by the devastating, crushing realization that he had lost. The Omega he had underestimated had not only left him, he had found a monster to protect him, and had become a queen in the shadows. "You're making a mistake, Julian," Kalen whispered hoarsely, blood staining his teeth. "He is a criminal. He will destroy you." Silas didn't even look at him. He turned his back on the broken Alpha, walking slowly back to my side. He reached out, gently taking my hand in his, interlacing our fingers in front of the man who had abandoned me. The warmth of Silas's palm was a stark contrast to the coldness I had endured for years. "He already rebuilt me," I said, squeezing Silas's hand. Kalen squeezed his eyes shut, a single, agonizing sob escaping him. He slowly staggered to his feet, a defeated, empty shell of a man. He turned and walked out into the cold night, the heavy oak doors closing behind him, sealing the Sterling Empire out of my life forever. End of Part 5. Part 6. The heavy, reinforced oak doors slammed shut, the metallic click of the deadbolts echoing through the cavernous foyer like the final strike of a judge's gavel. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and profound. Outside, the sounds of Kalen's retreating mercenaries, the revving of armored truck engines and the crunch of tires on gravel, slowly faded into the cold Oakhaven night. They were leaving. They were actually leaving. The terrifying storm that had threatened to tear my new sanctuary apart had broken against the iron will of the Obsidian Syndicate, and more importantly, it had broken against my own newfound resolve. I stood frozen in the center of the marble floor, my fingers still intertwined with Silas's. The adrenaline that had kept me standing, that had fueled my defiance against the man who had tormented me for 5 years, suddenly evaporated. Without it, my body remembered the sheer, terrifying exhaustion of the confrontation. My knees buckled. I didn't hit the floor. Before gravity could claim me, Silas's powerful arms wrapped around my waist, hauling me flush against his solid, heavily armored chest. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask if I was okay. He simply buried his face in the crook of my neck, right over the faded silver crescent scar of my dead bond, and released a long, shuddering breath. The dark, intoxicating scent of tobacco, leather, and gunpowder enveloped me completely, a heavy blanket of absolute alpha protection that coaxed my trembling muscles to finally relax. "He's gone," I whispered, the words trembling against Silas's collarbone. "He's really gone." "He is," Silas rumbled, his deep voice vibrating through my chest. One of his large, calloused hands moved up to cup the back of my head, gently threading his fingers through my hair. "And he will never, ever cast a shadow over you again. You were magnificent, Julian. You broke his hold on you entirely by yourself." I closed my eyes, a single tear slipping down my cheek, not of sorrow, but of profound, overwhelming relief. I had faced the ghost of my past, and I had realized it had no power over me anymore. "Boss." Grigori's rough voice broke the quiet intimacy of the moment. The giant enforcer emerged from the hallway leading to the secure bunker, his assault rifle lowered. He took one look at the two of us holding each other in the center of the foyer and offered a rare, genuine smile. "Perimeter is secure. The Sterling convoy is halfway to the state line. They aren't looking back." Silas didn't release me, but he turned his head slightly. "Good. Double the watch for the next 48 hours, just in case Sterling's bruised ego makes him do something stupid. But the war is over, Grigori." "And the pup?" I asked frantically, pulling back just enough to look at the enforcer. "Fast asleep, Julian," Grigori chuckled softly. He made it through 2 superhero movies and a bowl of popcorn before he passed out on the couch. Didn't hear a single gunshot. A wet, breathless laugh escaped my lips. My son was safe. My heart was safe. Silas looked down at me, his dark obsidian eyes softening into something so incredibly tender it made my breath hitch. He gently wiped the lone tear from my cheek with his thumb. "Come, let's get you upstairs. The battle is won, little Omega. It's time to rest." 300 miles away, Kalen Sterling returned to a kingdom of glass and ash. The sun was rising over the city skyline, casting a cold, sterile light into the massive penthouse office of the Sterling Corporation. Kalen stood by the window, staring out at the empire he had built, the empire he had been willing to wage a bloody war to protect. It meant absolutely nothing. His throat was deeply bruised, a physical reminder of the terrifying power of the Alpha who had claimed his husband. But the physical pain was eclipsed by the agonizing, biological void in his chest. The severed bond was a phantom limb, a constant, sickening ache that reminded him with every heartbeat of the family he had thrown away. The door to the office opened slowly. Elias walked in, looking pale and hesitant. He saw Kalen's bruised face, his torn clothes, and the hollow, dead look in his silver eyes. "Kalen," Elias whispered, stepping forward. "What happened? Did you find him?" Kalen didn't turn around. He simply looked at his reflection in the glass. The immaculate CEO was gone, replaced by a broken, feral creature who had lost his pack. He thought of Julian's cold, unflinching eyes. He thought of the faded scar on his neck. "I survived you." "Pack your things, Elias," Kalen said, his voice a hoarse, empty rasp. Elias froze. "What? Why?" "I'm here for you, Kalen. Let me help you heal." "Pack your things," Kalen repeated, finally turning around. The feral gold in his eyes was gone, replaced by an endless, crushing despair. "I am dissolving the executive board. I am stepping down as CEO. And you are leaving this city." "Kalen, you can't." Elias cried, tears spilling over his cheeks. "We love each other. We are supposed to be together." "We were a delusion," Kalen said softly, the absolute truth finally settling over him like a suffocating shroud. "A delusion that cost me the only real thing I ever had. You are a memory, Elias. And I can't look at you without seeing the blood on my own hands. Leave." Elias sobbed, but the finality in Kalen's voice was absolute. The delicate Omega turned and fled the office, leaving Kalen entirely alone in the massive, silent room. Kalen walked over to his desk. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a framed photograph. It was from Leo's 3rd birthday. Julian was smiling softly, holding a laughing Leo, while Kalen stood stiffly beside them, looking at his watch, distracted by some meaningless corporate crisis. He traced Julian's smiling face with a trembling finger. The realization was a slow, agonizing poison. Silas Vane hadn't stolen his family. Kalen had handed them over, piece by neglected piece, until there was nothing left to hold onto. He sank into his leather chair, pulling the photograph to his chest, and for the first time in his meticulously controlled life, the great Alphacio broke down and wept, the sound echoing endlessly in the empty glass tomb he had built for himself. He vanished from their lives, leaving them to the shadows, while he remained trapped in the glaring, unforgiving light. 6 months later, the Narrows of Oakhaven were thriving under a new, undeniable golden age. The Obsidian Syndicate had always been powerful, but under the meticulous, brilliant financial restructuring I had implemented, it had become untouchable. I hadn't just rerouted their laundering operations, I had legitimized half of their business fronts. We owned shipping lines, real estate development firms, and security companies. The men who used to look at me with cautious suspicion now bowed their heads respectfully when I walked through the compound. I wasn't just Silas Vane's guest anymore. I was the architect of his empire's future. It was a crisp autumn evening. The leaves in the compound's massive private gardens were turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson. I was sitting on the stone terrace, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, watching Leo run across the manicured lawn. He was chasing Grigori, who was pretending to be a slow, lumbering zombie, much to the 5-year-old's absolute delight. Leo's laughter rang out, clear and unburdened. He was taller now, his cheeks flushed with health and happiness. He had started attending an exclusive private academy in the upper district of Oakhaven, escorted every day by a rotating detail of Silas's most elite men. He was safe, he was loved, and he was thriving. "He's going to exhaust my best enforcer," a deep, warm voice murmured right beside my ear. I smiled, leaning back into the solid warmth of Silas's chest as he stepped up behind my chair. He rested his large hands on my shoulders, his thumbs gently rubbing the tension from my muscles. His dark tobacco scent wrapped around me, a comforting, familiar blanket that I had come to crave more than anything in the world. "Grigori enjoys it," I replied, tilting my head back to look up at him. "Though I think Leo is going to demand a higher allowance for successfully defeating the Zombie King." Silas chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the air. He leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my temple. It was a casual gesture, entirely devoid of the aggressive, possessive claims Kalen used to make. Silas's touches were always a question, an offering of affection that waited for my silent permission. Over the past 6 months, Silas and I had navigated a delicate, beautiful dance. He had kept his promise. He hadn't pushed. He had allowed me to heal, to find my footing, to build my own identity within the syndicate. But the simmering, unspoken tension between us had grown into a brilliant, undeniable fire. My Omega biology, completely recovered from the trauma of my unanchored heat, was practically singing in his presence. "Julian," Silas said softly, the amusement fading from his voice, replaced by a profound, heavy sincerity. "Walk with me for a moment." I nodded, standing up and taking his offered hand. He led me away from the terrace, down a winding stone path that led to the edge of the estate's property, overlooking the sprawling, glittering lights of the lower district of Oakhaven. The night air was cool, but holding his hand kept the chill at bay. Silas stopped at the edge of the overlook, turning to face me. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, the faint scar over his eyebrow, and the absolute, burning devotion in his dark eyes. When you first stumbled into that alley, shivering and burning with fever, holding a pup in your arms, I told you that I collected discarded things, Silas began, his voice a low, intimate rumble. I was wrong. I didn't collect a discarded thing. I found a king who had been forced to live as a pawn. My breath hitched, my heart accelerating in my chest. I looked up at him, my eyes tracing the familiar, beloved lines of his face. You brought light into a world built entirely on shadows, Julian, Silas continued, taking a step closer, completely enveloping me in his aura. But it wasn't suffocating. It felt like coming home. You gave my men a reason to fight for something better. You gave me a reason to want a future that wasn't just survival. I have built an empire, but looking at you, I realize none of it means anything if you aren't standing beside me to rule it. He reached into the inner pocket of his dark overcoat. My breath stopped entirely. He didn't pull out a velvet ring box. He pulled out a heavy, intricately carved piece of solid obsidian, attached to a thick silver chain. It was the crest of the Obsidian Syndicate, a roaring wolf, eyes inlaid with tiny, flawless diamonds. It was a piece worn only by the absolute head of the family. I don't want to buy you with corporate rings, Julian, Silas murmured, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. I don't want to lock you in a gilded cage and claim you as property. I want you as my equal, my partner, my mate. I am asking for your permission to court you, properly, in the old ways. To prove to you, every single day, that my soul recognizes yours. Tears, hot and fast, welled in my eyes. Kalen had marked me out of duty, tossing a diamond ring at me like a business transaction. Silas Vane, the most terrifying man in Oakhaven, was standing in the moonlight, offering me half his empire and his entire heart, and asking for my consent. Silas, I breathed, my hands trembling as I reached up to cup his face. The stubble on his jaw was rough beneath my palms, grounding me in this beautiful, impossible reality. You don't need to court me. You won my heart the night you caught me when I fell. Silas's breath hitched, the stoic alpha facade finally cracking to reveal the overwhelming, desperate hope underneath. Are you sure? Julian, once I truly claim you, I will never, ever let you go. The world will burn before I allow you to be taken from me. Then let it burn, I whispered, rising onto my toes. I didn't wait for him to close the distance. For the first time in my life, I took what I wanted. I pressed my lips to his. The kiss was an explosion of heat, passion, and years of suppressed longing. Silas groaned, a deep, guttural sound of pure alpha satisfaction, his powerful arms wrapping around my waist and lifting me off the ground. He kissed me with a desperate, consuming reverence, his mouth moving over mine like a man who had been starving his entire life and had finally been offered a feast. My Omega instincts flared, bright and beautiful, completely overriding the trauma of the past. The scent of dark tobacco and leather filled my lungs, and for the first time, I pushed my own pheromones out, sweet, warm, and entirely accepting, wrapping them around his dark aura in a perfect, harmonious bond. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, Silas rested his forehead against mine. He reached up and gently clasped the heavy obsidian necklace around my neck. The cool stone rested against my collarbone, right above the faded, silver scar of my past. It felt heavy. It felt right. My Omega, Silas whispered, his voice thick with emotion, his thumb brushing over the obsidian crest. My queen. I smiled, tears of absolute joy spilling over my cheeks. I looked down at the glittering lights of Oakhaven, the lawless, dangerous city that had saved my life. I looked back at the massive estate, where my son was currently laughing and safe. And then I looked at the incredible, dangerous, devoted alpha holding me in his arms. I was Julian Vane now. The boy who had cried in the dark, waiting for an alpha who would never come, was dead. In his place stood a man who had walked through the fire, severed his own chains, and found a love that was fierce, protective, and entirely his own. The ghost of Kalen Sterling had finally vanished from my life, completely erased by the dark, magnificent reality of the Obsidian Syndicate. And as Silas pulled me back in for another kiss, under the moonlight of my new kingdom, I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't just a happy ending. It was the beginning of my reign. End of story.